So what are we to expect?
We have the defense team wanting to argue their motion that the jurors should be polled so that potentially they can knock out the most serious charge, the murder charge, as well as the leaving the scene. And then we have the secondary component of it, which is the scheduling. If the prosecution decides to still go forward, what are the trial dates going to be? By law, by mass law, the case has to be retried within a year. So by July 1 of 2025.
Oh, wow. Okay. And what do you think the chances of them dropping the two other charges?
I think the judge almost has to pull the jury back and poll them because it creates an issue for the defendant known as a double jeopardy issue, which means she can't be tried twice for the same charges stemming from the same set of facts. And that's what the defense is hanging their hat on. They're saying we've had 5 jurors come forward, all of whom have said there was a unanimous decision on the murder charge of a not guilty and a unanimous decision of not guilty on leaving the scene. The only charge that the jury was hung up on, according to these 5 jurors in the defense filing, was the involuntary manslaughter charge. So the judge has to find a balance between protecting the public, but also ensuring that the defendant has a fair hearing. And where we've had not 1 or 2, but 5 jurors purportedly coming forward and saying they had a unanimous verdict, I think the judge has to poll them, has to find out if it truly was unanimous on those 2 charges. And if it was a unanimous verdict of not guilty, then I think justice is going to require her to enter a not guilty finding on those 2 charges, which would leave the prosecution with the involuntary manslaughter charge. Still a very serious charge, but certainly not as serious as the murder charge.
What's the maximum for involuntary manslaughter charge?
I'd have to look it up. It's not a minimum penalty, like it's not a minimum jail sentence the way that you would have for a murder charge. So it could be if she was convicted simply of the involuntary manslaughter charge, it could be that she either has a suspended sentence and just has probation, or she could just get straight probation. She may not ever have jail time on the involuntary manslaughter charge.
So really the big question is what was what was it, how did jurors come out on the 2 other charges that will really determine where the next steps go?
Absolutely. If the judge does decide to poll the jury and the jury does say, yes, we were unanimous on those 2 charges, then then Karen Reed, in a sense, gets a victory, right? The most serious charge is knocked out. The other charge, leaving the scene, is knocked out, and so now she's left with a a negligence claim basically of a manslaughter.
If it's not unanimous, does that mean they could keep those 2 charges up?
Yeah, so if the jury is polled and they say, no, actually, 5 of them say, well, we were unanimous, and the other 7 say we were not unanimous, or even if 1 juror says we weren't unanimous, then the murder charge would stand, the involuntary manslaughter, and the leaving the scene. All 3 charges would stay intact and could be prosecuted again.
So we could be going through this whole thing over again.
It looks like we will be going through this whole thing over again, because we have to remember that even if just the negligent, the manslaughter charge survives, you still have the same facts, the same evidence that needs to come in, because the prosecution still needs to explain through witnesses what they think happened and what their theory of the case is, and ultimately prove beyond a reasonable doubt that she was under the influence of alcohol, acted in a negligent manner, which resulted in his death. That means all those same witnesses, all that same testimony is going to need to come forth again. So we could be looking at another 9-week trial, even though it's not a murder case anymore.
And what happens to Karen Reed? Does she keep her same attorneys? Can she afford this?
The question of whether or not she can afford it is probably the bigger question. I mean, we know that she's listed her house for sale, which presumably is to help pay for legal fees if she hasn't been living there and she can't afford the maintenance and the upkeep anymore. Why not sell it and take that cash to pay attorneys? But she could certainly keep the same attorneys, and I would imagine she will keep the same attorneys. They did a very good job for her all throughout this case, and I don't see any reason why she would want to change them.
And so will a decision be made tomorrow by the judge?
It's unlikely that the judge would rule from the bench. something of this significance, she would want to write some sort of findings with it to say why she decided the way she did. So I imagine that she'll take it what we call under advisement, and that we'll have a ruling on it very shortly, I think within the week, because she does know that this is time sensitive and everybody needs to regroup. Whatever the result is, the defense and the prosecution both need to regroup and plan for the next trial.
So the hearing, is the hearing basically both sides present their cases again, or is it just it's a hearing where the judge comes together and says, listen, this is where we stand? And
So the defense is going to be able to argue their motion first because they're the moving party. So the defense is going to argue we have 5 jurors come forward, have said they had a unanimous verdict on 2 of the charges. We want to have you poll the jury and confirm that that's in fact the case. And if it is the case, then enter not guilty finding on the murder and the leaving the scene of the motor vehicle homicide. Excuse me, leaving the scene of personal injury or death. The prosecution's going to also have an opportunity to argue to say, no, they weren't unanimous. There's no need to poll this jury. This is just another attempt by the prosecution, an outrageous attempt by the defense to try to knock out these charges, and there's nothing supporting their requests. I do think the judge is going to allow the defense request. I do think she's going to have this jury come back and be polled to determine whether or not they really were unanimous on any of the charges. And for that reason, I think she's going to take it under advisement and think about it and probably issue some findings as to why she ruled the way she did or does within, a very short period of time.
Your overall assumption is that this will go back to trial, and most likely all charges will be kept on. Do you think some charges will be removed?
If the jury truly was unanimous, then they have to get rid of the murder charge and the leaving the scene. If the jury was not in fact unanimous, then all charges would be tried again.
Because jurors have even been threatened at this point.
Yes, I mean, Judge Canone extended the impoundment order protecting the jurors' identities because some jurors have come forward saying that they're very concerned about threats of harm to themselves and their family. One of the jurors said they could hear the Free Karen Read protesters yelling and screaming outside while they were trying to deliberate. And that makes you wonder, in the beginning of this case, Judge Canone sort of took this move where she said, nobody, unless you're involved with the court, have direct business in the courthouse, you can't come within 200 yards of the courthouse. Is she going to be required to extend that even farther, maybe push them farther across the street? Because if the juror, while deliberating, could hear both sides, or one or both sides, doesn't much matter, it's really disruptive to their deliberation process. So is that going to come into play again? And is Judge Canone going to feel compelled to push protesters or outspoken people on either side farther back to give the jury some more breathing room?